Florence, Italy, 1890. Welcome, dearest Nightingale newsletter readers, to a tale that begins not with joy, but with the sound of a heart breaking in silence. The first crack of dawn spilled over the terracotta roofs of Florence, gilding the city in gold, and yet, inside the Moretti villa, the air was heavy as confession. "Sign it, Marco," her mother whispered. "Before the creditors arrive again." Gabriella froze in the doorway. The paper on the table glimmered with her name, written by someone else's hand. Gabriella Moretti, betrothed to His Grace, the Duke of Eldereach. Her father's quill trembled, blotting the ink. A single drop bled across her name. "For the family," he muttered. "Always for the family." She wanted to speak, to scream, but her voice caught in her throat like a bird against glass. The window behind her framed the rising sun, a cruel witness to her undoing. Outside, the bells of Santa Maria del Fiore began to ring. Wedding bells. Joyful to the city, merciless to her. Each toll was a countdown to the life she didn't choose. She turned away, her hands stained with paint from the morning sketches, her last attempt at beauty before duty swallowed her whole. On the courtyard easel, her unfinished painting caught the light, a woman's silhouette standing before a storm. It felt like prophecy. "Gabriella," her mother called softly. "Come. They've sent your gown from England." The words dropped like stones. England, cold, grey and foreign. The home of a man she had never met, a man whispered to be widowed, bitter, and dangerous. They said he was too old. They said his last wife had died in the dark. But none of that mattered. Her father's debts did. The seamstress laced her into the gown. White silk. English cut. The fabric whispered as she moved, heavy as guilt. When the final ribbon was tied, she caught her reflection, pale, fragile, adorned like an offering. The mirror trembled with candlelight, and for a moment, she thought she saw another woman behind her, a ghost, perhaps the last Duchess of Eldereach. Her chest tightened. "Is this love?" she whispered. Lucia, her maid, looked away. "No, Signorina. This is survival." A pin pricked her skin. Blood bloomed on lace. She didn't flinch. The gown fit perfectly, except around her heart. Later that afternoon, trunks were loaded, the family gathered in the courtyard. The carriage gleamed black, waiting to claim her. Her father didn't meet her eyes. Her mother pressed a rosary into her palm and kissed her forehead. "Be obedient. Be kind." But Gabriella only nodded, afraid that if she spoke, she'd beg to stay. She slipped her sketchbook into her satchel, her rebellion wrapped in paper, and stepped into the carriage. The horses stamped impatiently. The driver cracked his whip. As Florence began to blur behind her, she held her paintbrushes close, clutching them as if they could still save her. For a long moment, she dared not look back. Then, as the bells faded and the sky turned from gold to gray, she whispered to herself, "Remember who you were, Gabriella. Before they traded your name for his." And somewhere, far beyond the horizon, in the misty distance of England, a man named Percival of Eldereach signed a letter that would bind their fates forever. If you were Gabriella, would you choose duty over freedom? The ship lurched in the Black Sea, tossing Gabriella forward, her hands gripping the rail, the cold biting through her gloves. Rain lashed her face, salt stung her lips, and somewhere in the storm's roar, she wondered if God himself had turned his back on her. England loomed ahead like a bruise against the horizon. By dawn, the vessel docked. The air was nothing like Florence, damp, gray, and heavy with silence. She stepped onto the wharf, her skirts already soaked, her heart a small, trembling thing. The port smelled of coal and iron, men shouting orders she didn't understand. A man in a dark coat approached, bowing stiffly. "Lady Eldereach," he said in clipped English. "His Grace's carriage awaits." The title struck her like a slap. Lady Eldereach. It didn't fit her mouth. It didn't fit her soul. As the carriage rumbled through endless fog, she pressed her forehead against the cold glass. The countryside rolled past, vast, empty fields and skeletal trees bowing in the wind. Nothing of Italy's warmth remained. When the carriage turned up the long, gravel drive, she saw it, Eldereach Manor. A castle carved from shadow. Its towers cut through the mist like blades, the windows unlit, the gates creaking as they opened. The housekeeper, tall, stern, unsmiling, greeted her at the door. "Welcome, Your Grace," she said. "His lordship awaits in the east drawing-room." Gabriella's pulse raced. She was not ready. Not for the man. Not for the life. She followed the woman through endless corridors lined with portraits, pale faces staring down with judgment centuries old. Every footstep echoed like a verdict. Then, a door opened. He stood there. The Duke of Eldereach. Older than she expected, perhaps late 30s, tall, with dark hair streaked with gray, and eyes like winter storms, beautiful, unreadable, dangerous. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he inclined his head. "Lady Gabriella." "Your Grace," she managed, her voice fragile as glass. He studied her quietly, gaze steady but not unkind. "You must be tired from your journey." She nodded, though what she felt wasn't fatigue, it was dislocation. As if she'd stepped into someone else's life. He turned away slightly, hands clasped behind his back. "The ceremony will be brief. You need not trouble yourself with formalities. Florence must miss you." That caught her off guard. "You've been to Florence?" He hesitated. "Once. Long ago." There was something in his tone, wistful, distant, that made her heart shift. The wedding took place 2 days later in the small chapel beside the manor. No music. No guests beyond 2 witnesses and the priest. She wore the same gown, the same pinpricks of pain against her ribs. When he placed the ring on her finger, his touch was steady, not possessive, not tender, merely respectful. Afterward, she was shown to her chamber. The silence between them hung like fog. Night fell heavy. She sat by the fire, staring at her reflection, a duchess now, though she felt like a painting hung in the wrong gallery. Then, a knock. Her breath caught. A maid entered, holding a small velvet box. "From His Grace," she said softly. Gabriella opened it, expecting jewels, perhaps. Instead, inside lay a single iron key and a folded note. "This opens the east wing. You are free to go where you wish. No one should be forced to love." The room tilted. Her fingers trembled over the words. She waited for anger, for confusion, but what came instead was something far more dangerous: wonder. Who was this man who gave freedom where the world demanded ownership? Who left mercy where desire should have been? She pressed the note to her heart and let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like a sob. Perhaps love was not always born from passion, but from kindness, offered in the quiet. Outside, the wind howled through the manor's corridors, rattling the old windows like ghosts whispering secrets. And somewhere beyond her door, the Duke stood in the hallway, listening, his hand hovering near the latch, his eyes fixed on the light beneath it, before walking away into the dark. Do you think mercy can spark love? Comment yes or no below. Your thoughts may shape how the next heart chooses. The scream shattered the dawn. Gabriella bolted upright in her bed, the cold air slicing through the remnants of sleep. It wasn't her voice, it came from the corridor. She threw on her robe, heart hammering, and rushed to the door. The manor, so still the night before, was alive now with footsteps and panic. "Miss Elspeth," a maid cried, clutching at her apron. "She's fainted, down in the east wing." The east wing. The very place the Duke had given her the key to. Gabriella's pulse thrummed as she hurried after the sound. The corridor there was colder, lined with tapestries that seemed to move in the draught. A group of servants knelt beside a young girl on the floor, her face pale, eyes wide open but seeing nothing. In her hand was a locket. "What happened?" Gabriella demanded. She was cleaning near the old gallery, one of them whispered, trembling. "Said she saw someone, said His Grace's brother walks these halls again." A chill slipped down Gabriella's spine. "His brother?" The housekeeper's voice cut through the air like steel. "That will be enough. Back to your duties, all of you." As the servants scattered, the housekeeper turned to Gabriella, her expression unreadable. "Forgive the staff, Your Grace. The manor feeds on old stories. You'll learn to ignore them." But Gabriella couldn't ignore the way the woman's hands shook. Later that morning, she found the Duke in the conservatory. He was sketching something, blueprints, perhaps, and didn't look up until she spoke. "Your Grace, who is your brother?" His pencil froze midline. Slowly, he lifted his gaze. "That name shouldn't reach your ears." "But it has," she said, voice trembling but firm. "If I am to live in this house, I cannot live among ghosts." A long silence. Then he stood, walking toward the tall windows where the rain smeared the glass. "My brother, Edmund, was the heir once. Brilliant, reckless, and adored. He drowned in 1874. Or so we were told. Were told? He turned to her then, his expression caught between pain and disbelief. His body was never found. Some say he left, that he fled. There are nights when the staff swear they hear his violin from the east wing. Gabriella's throat tightened. And you? What do you believe? I believe, he said slowly, that guilt has a sound. And this house has been listening to it for far too long. He left before she could answer. That night, unable to sleep, Gabriella took the key and crept into the east wing. The air there felt different, denser, as though holding its breath. The walls bore portraits that hadn't been dusted in years. One painting caught her eye, two boys standing side by side, both with the same sharp jaw and silver-flecked eyes. In the corner, a violin lay on a chair. A single string was snapped. When she reached for it, a gust of wind blew through the open window, extinguishing her candle. She froze, then heard it, footsteps. Who's there? No answer. Only the faint scrape of something metal against stone. She backed away, clutching the key, her breath ragged. Then, softly, music. A violin's low hum, mournful and distant, echoing through the corridor. Gabriella fled. The next morning, she found the Duke in the library, standing by the fire. There was someone in the east wing, she said. I heard. Enough. His tone was sharp, but his eyes betrayed unease. The east wing is forbidden for a reason. Then why give me the key? She challenged. His jaw tightened. Because I thought you would understand boundaries. Or perhaps, she whispered, you wanted me to find something. For the first time, his composure cracked. You think I'd endanger you? My God, Gabriella, I've spent years trying to bury that past. Then why does it still haunt your house? He turned away, running a hand through his hair. Because guilt is a poor thing to bury, it always claws its way back up. Silence stretched between them, heavy and sharp. Then she said softly, you're not the monster they think you are you? His laugh was hollow. You think kindness makes me innocent? No, my lady. It only makes me lonelier. And with that, he left her standing there, heart thundering, unsure if she pitied him or feared him more. That evening, as storm clouds gathered again, Gabriella returned to her room, and found another note slipped beneath the door. It was written in ink so faded it looked like dried tears. Do not trust the Duke. He lies as easily as he breathes. No signature. No seal. Only a faint smudge of what looked like soot on the corner. She turned the paper over, her fingers trembling. On the back was something hastily scrawled, an address. Gravesend, by the cliffs. Below it, he waits. Gabriella's heart stopped. She looked toward the east wing, where the wind pressed against the old windows, whistling through the cracks. Somewhere in that storm, she could swear she heard the faintest sound again, violin strings, weeping in the dark. And beneath it, a man's whisper. Her name. Gabriella. She dropped the paper as thunder rolled across the moors. The candle flickered violently, and went out. Only the whisper remained. And it sounded nothing like the Duke. The candle exploded in her hand. Wax splattered across the mirror, flames leaping up the wick as Gabriella stumbled backward with a cry. The wind had burst through her chamber window with such force it felt like the house itself had screamed. She snatched the curtain, beating the flame out before it spread. The smell of burnt linen filled the air. And then she saw it. Across the mirror, written in fogged breath, a single word shimmered before fading, run. Her knees weakened. The mirror cleared, showing only her reflection, pale, trembling, wide-eyed. But beneath her image, she thought she saw another silhouette standing behind her, tall, still, watching. When she turned, the room was empty. By morning, the letter from the night before was gone. Only the faint outline where it had lain on her table remained. Gabriella's mind refused peace, questions clawed at her chest like caged birds. She had to know who had written that note, and why the Duke seemed more haunted than his own ghosts. At breakfast, she found him sitting alone at the long dining table. His untouched tea had gone cold. You look as though you've seen an apparition, he murmured without looking up. Perhaps I have, she said, taking a seat across from him. Does the name Gravesend mean anything to you? His hand froze around the cup. Where did you hear that? It was written in a letter. One that vanished by morning. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then, with a weary sigh, he rose from his chair and walked to the window. Gravesend is not a place you should ever go. It's where my brother's ship was last seen before the storm. Then it's where I must go, she said. He turned sharply. You will not. You can't stop me. I can, and I will. His voice cracked like thunder, echoing through the marble hall. You think this is some Gothic fairy tale? Edmund is dead, Gabriella. And if he isn't, then what's out there is far worse than the memory you're chasing. The air between them thickened, charged. Then tell me, she said, trembling. Tell me what you did to him. His eyes went dark. Leave it alone. But the moment he walked away, she knew she never would. That night, she stole one of the horses from the stable. The rain was relentless, slicing her face as she rode toward the cliffs. The path to Gravesend was narrow, twisting between crags and marsh, but the pull was stronger than fear. Something inside her whispered that truth waited there, truth that would shatter the life she'd been given. By the time she reached the edge of the cliffs, lightning had split the sky open. Below, waves crashed violently against jagged rock. A small stone cottage clung to the edge like a secret refusing to die. She tied the horse and climbed down, slipping, half-blinded by rain. The door creaked open with the faintest push. Inside, the air smelled of salt and rot. A single candle flickered on a table beside a violin, its body scarred, its bow resting like a sleeping blade. Gabriella. She froze. The voice came from the shadows behind her. When she turned, a man stepped into the light. His face was pale, his hair the same dark gold as Percival's, but his eyes were colder. Edmund, she whispered. He smiled faintly. So my brother's bride found me. Her heart pounded. You're alive. Alive, he repeated, with a hollow laugh. If you call this living. He stepped closer, the candlelight flickering across scars that cut through his cheek and neck. He never told you the truth, did he? What truth? That the storm didn't kill me, Edmund said. He did. Gabriella's breath hitched. No, Percival, he wouldn't. Wouldn't? Edmund's voice sharpened. He envied me. My inheritance. My freedom. My music. He took everything, even my name. I've lived here, forgotten, while he played the grieving brother. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating his face, and for a fleeting second, she saw something wild in his eyes. Not grief. Not madness. Something in between. Why tell me this? She asked softly. Because, he whispered, stepping closer until she could feel his breath, he's coming. And when he does, you'll see what kind of man you've married. Before she could answer, a gunshot tore through the storm. The window shattered. Edmund staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Gabriella screamed. Through the shattered door, she saw him, Percival, his coat drenched, pistol trembling in his hand, rain streaming down his face. Step away from her, the Duke shouted. Still the executioner, Edmund hissed. Still the liar, Percival spat back. Gabriella stood between them, shaking, rain and tears indistinguishable on her face. Stop it. For God's sake, stop. Neither moved. Another flash of lightning. Two brothers, one love, one betrayal, standing on the edge of the world. Then, in the silence before the thunder, Edmund whispered, He'll never let you go, Gabriella. Not while you still hold the key. She looked down, realizing the velvet box she'd once hidden in her dress pocket was now gone. Her eyes darted up. And Edmund was too. Vanished into the storm. Leaving her alone between the two halves of a past that refused to stay buried. Blood streaked down her arm. Gabriella stumbled against the wall of the manor's corridor, breath ragged, the thunder still rolling behind her like a beast in pursuit. The key Edmund had mentioned, the one she'd thought was gone, slipped from her trembling hand, hitting the marble floor with a metallic cry that echoed through the silence. It had been hidden inside her gown's lining all along. She stared at it, her pulse wild, realizing now that whatever truth the Duke of Eldereach had buried, it had always been meant for her to find. Gabriella. His voice boomed down the hallway, deep and desperate. She turned. Percival stood at the far end, soaked to the bone, his pistol still in his grip. His face looked carved from grief and fury. Where is he? She demanded. Gone, he rasped. Like a ghost that refuses to die. Is he your ghost or mine, Percival? He flinched as though struck. You don't understand. I understand enough. Her voice broke, echoing through the grand, hollow house. I saw his face. I heard what he said. Did you kill your brother? The Duke lowered the pistol, his hand shaking. I tried to save him. Then why does he say you didn't? Because guilt makes liars of us all. He stepped closer, his eyes raw with memory. Edmund and I were caught in that storm together. His ship was sinking. I reached for him, but he refused my hand. He said if he couldn't live free, he'd rather drown than return home under my shadow. Gabriella's tears mingled with the rain still dripping from her hair. And you let him go? I begged him to stay. But he chose the sea. She shook her head. Then how is he alive? I don't know, Percival whispered. But if he is, then something darker than death is keeping him tethered here. The wind outside screamed, slamming the windows open. The candles guttered. The Duke looked down and saw the key glinting at her feet. His face paled. Where did you get that? It was sewn into my dress, she said softly. By your housekeeper, perhaps? Or by fate? He took a step forward, but she clutched the key to her chest. What does it open, Percival? The one door that should never be opened. Then it's the one I must see. He lunged to stop her, but she was already running. Down the hall, through the cold corridors of Eldereach, until she reached the east wing, the forbidden wing that had stood locked since the day she arrived. The door was carved with vines and angels, its hinges crusted with age. She slid the key in, and with a groan like something long asleep, it turned. The door opened. The smell of dust and forgotten dreams filled the air. Inside, moonlight streamed through high windows, revealing a vast room lined with portraits, women, pale and beautiful, each painted with sorrow in her eyes. Percival's wives, Gabriella whispered. But then she saw it, a final canvas, draped in a white cloth. Her fingers shook as she reached out and pulled it free. Her own face stared back at her. The painting was unfinished, but unmistakably her. Her eyes, her smile, her curls. Her dress, the very one she wore the night she arrived at Eldereach. A sound escaped her throat, half sob, half gasp. Do you see now? Percival's voice came from behind her. He stood in the doorway, shadows clinging to his face. I began it the night before our wedding, he said quietly. I dreamed of you before I met you. Every brushstroke haunted me until I believed you were only in my mind. And then you came. Gabriella turned slowly. You painted me before I existed? I thought I had gone mad, he said. The portrait came to me after Edmund's disappearance. I painted it to still the visions, but each stroke felt like prophecy. I told myself you were only a dream. But when I saw you walk into the chapel, I knew fate had drawn you here. Fate, she whispered. Or guilt? His jaw tightened. Both. The candles flared suddenly, a violent wind sweeping through the room. Every portrait shuddered, frames rattling on the walls. Gabriella clutched the edge of the easel, staring as one by one, the painted eyes of the women turned toward her. Percival, she breathed. The Duke crossed the room, pulling her against him as the wind roared harder. This place is cursed with what I could not forgive, he said, voice trembling. And now it's come for us both. What do we do? He looked down at her, his gaze breaking with helpless affection. We face it together. Lightning slashed the night outside, illuminating the unfinished painting, her painted self, now weeping crimson tears down the canvas. And as thunder shook the walls of Eldereach, Gabriella realized that love had indeed crossed oceans. But it had also awakened something ancient, waiting in the dark. She was gone before dawn. The note lay on his pillow, damp with the tears she hadn't meant to shed. Percival read it once, twice, then crushed it in his fist. Forgive me. I cannot stay where I have become your ruin. The ink had bled, but the words cut clear as glass. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped. It fell like punishment, turning the gravel of Eldereach into black rivers. The Duke didn't change from the clothes he'd worn the night before. His boots left wet tracks through the corridor as he stalked to the stables, fury and heartbreak warring in his chest. Where did the carriage go? He barked. The stable hand bowed low, trembling. To Dover, your grace. The Duchess requested passage on the morning tide. He froze. She was running to Italy. Back to the sunlight, the color, the life she thought he'd taken from her. For the first time in years, Percival didn't know what to do. His whole life had been built on control, his estate, his silence, his penance. And now? The woman who'd taught him to breathe again was somewhere on the road, believing herself a curse. He slammed a hand against the stall door. Damn it, Gabriella, why couldn't you stay? Gabriella sat in the dim carriage, staring out at the endless gray. Every mile between her and Eldereach felt like a knife twisting deeper. The servants' whispers still rang in her ears, poison, spun by a jealous mouth. They say the Duchess carries a bastard child. Not the Duke's. A painter's. She'd laughed then, laughed until it broke into a sob. She'd painted portraits, yes, but never men. Never him. Yet rumor, like rot, didn't care for truth. It only fed on it. She pressed her palm to her belly, trembling. There was no child. Only the ache of what might have been. The rain blurred the countryside into watercolor. England, gray and cruel, was vanishing behind her. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that leaving would save him from scandal, but the lie burned her throat like smoke. She closed her eyes and saw his face, the quiet sorrow, the soft way he said her name as if it hurt him to speak it. Gabriella. Don't think of him, she whispered. You mustn't. But she did. Every mile. Every heartbeat. Back at Eldereach, the halls were silent. Even the portrait seemed to mourn. The Duchess's paintings, her laughter and color, were covered in white cloths. Percival sat by the fire, staring at her last unfinished canvas. His hand hovered over the brush she'd left behind. He touched it like a relic, as though by some miracle it might still hold her warmth. She's gone, my lord, said his steward quietly. And the rumors grow. The Countess of Wexford's doing, most likely. He didn't look up. Then it's time the Countess remembered what truth costs. She holds power, your grace. Influence. So did I, once. He rose, the brush clattering to the floor. Now I have nothing left to lose. In Florence, the bells rang for evening prayer. Gabriella's carriage stopped before her family's villa, vines crawling up the fading marble. It no longer felt like home. Her mother rushed to meet her, tears and worry tangled in her face. Gabriella, Dio mio, what have they done to you? Gabriella collapsed into her arms, exhausted. I'm fine, Mama. Truly. Then why do your eyes look as though you've buried something sacred? She smiled weakly. Because I have. That night, she sat before her easel again. The canvas waited, blank, cold. Her hand hovered with the brush, but the colors refused to come. She had left her muse in the rain. Back in England, thunder rolled once more across the moors. Percival's horse tore through the storm as he rode for London. If he could not find peace, he would find justice. The Countess had played her final hand. By the time dawn broke, the scandal had turned. Letters, testimonies, truths he'd long kept hidden surfaced like ghosts finally freed. The Countess's lies burned in her own fire. But victory meant nothing without her. He returned to Eldereach at sunset, soaked and empty. As he passed through the gallery, he noticed something new, a canvas leaning against the wall. His breath caught. The portrait was of him. Unfinished, soft light painted across his face, eyes filled with something he had never seen in himself, hope. She had painted it before leaving. He sank to his knees before it, voice breaking. You saw me. Even when I couldn't. The rain had stopped. Somewhere beyond the storm, he knew she was under the same sky, maybe painting the same dawn. He would find her. Even if he had to cross the world again, he would find her. The letter trembled in his hand, her handwriting, his salvation. The Countess's lies have reached Florence, but I will not let your name drown in them. I will defend what is true, what we were. Percival closed his eyes, the ache in his chest flooding into something fierce and alive. She still believed in him. Even after the storm, the rumors, the ruin, she still believed. He didn't think. He only acted. By dawn, his carriage was ready. By noon, he was on a ship bound for Italy, the gray cliffs of Dover fading like ghosts in his wake. The sea roared around him, cold and merciless, but his resolve burned steady. He would not lose her again, not to distance, not to lies, not to fear. Florence was gold when he arrived. The sun bled over the terracotta roofs, bathing the city in warmth that felt almost unreal after England's chill. He found her name whispered in the market, at a small gallery near the Arno. The foreign duchess who paints light. When he saw her again, she was standing before a canvas, brush in hand, her hair undone, a smear of paint on her wrist. She looked smaller somehow, but radiant, alive in a way that made him forget to breathe. She didn't notice him at first. The crowd had gathered for her exhibit, murmuring praise. When she turned, their eyes met, and the noise of Florence fell away. Percival, her voice cracked. He stepped forward, his heart pounding. You defended me. I couldn't let them destroy you for my sake. And I couldn't let you go for mine. The space between them dissolved. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box, the same shade as the one he'd once left on her vanity, but lighter, softer, as if time itself had forgiven them. She stared at it, breath trembling. Another key? He shook his head. A ring. But not for obligation. Not for treaty. Only if your heart commands it. Her eyes filled with tears. And if it does? He smiled, weary, tender, certain. Then it's already home. Later, as the sun dipped low over the city, they walked along the riverbank where musicians played softly. The world had slowed to a sigh, golden air, rippling water, the scent of jasmine on her skin. Gabriella stopped and turned to him, voice fragile as silk. Do you ever wish we'd met differently? He thought for a moment. No. Because then I might never have learned what mercy feels like. She laughed softly through her tears. And what does it feel like? Like this, he whispered, brushing his thumb along her cheek. Like coming home after a war you thought would never end. Back at the villa, she placed the new velvet box beside the old key she'd carried across the sea. Two relics, one of freedom, one of choice. As the candlelight flickered across their faces, she said, You once gave me a key to open a door. Tonight, I give you one, to my heart. He took her hand, kissed her knuckles. Then I will guard it with my life. The bells of Florence tolled in the distance, the same bells that had marked her leaving now sang her return. No longer a transaction. No longer a debt. Only love, freely given, finally returned. The gunshot shattered the silence. Percival spun, instinct taking over, but too late, the bullet had already found him. It tore through his shoulder, spinning him backward against the marble pillar of the villa courtyard. Gabriella screamed, the sound slicing through the night like glass. Percival! He stumbled, clutching his arm, blood soaking into his white shirt. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, Countess Fiorenza, her face half lit by the trembling flame of a lantern. I warned you, she hissed. You should have stayed in England. Gabriella ran toward him, but the Countess raised the pistol again. Don't move, Duchess. You think love redeems you? It destroys everything it touches. Please, Gabriella begged, tears streaking her cheeks. You've had your vengeance. Let him go. Fiorenza's hand trembled, hatred warring with something rawer, emptier. He ruined my family's name. You ruined my son's honor. And now you want peace? Percival forced himself upright, blood dripping from his fingers. If it's my life you want, take it. But leave her out of this. The Countess's lip quivered. Noble to the end. Just like your father. The words hit harder than the bullet. Percival froze, his breath catching. What did you say? Her eyes gleamed. Oh, you didn't know? My father ruined yours. History repeats, doesn't it? The pistol shook again. But before she could fire, Gabriella lunged forward. The shot went wide, exploding against the stone arch. Smoke filled the air, and the lantern crashed to the ground, flames licking the dry ivy. Run! Percival shouted, grabbing Gabriella's hand as the fire spread. They stumbled through the smoke-filled hallways, coughing, half-blinded. The villa groaned, timbers cracking, heat roaring around them. Behind them, the Countess's screams vanished beneath the collapsing roof. They burst out into the cold night air, gasping, the villa blazing behind them like a dying sun. Percival fell to his knees by the fountain, clutching his wound. Gabriella ripped a strip of fabric from her dress and pressed it to his shoulder, sobbing. You're bleeding too much. He gripped her hand, voice hoarse. You saved me. Again. Don't say that, she whispered fiercely. You're not dying here. Not now. Not when we just found our way back. The distant wail of bells echoed through Florence, not for celebration this time, but alarm. Gabriella glanced toward the hill where the city guard would come from. We have to go before they find us here. Percival groaned, trying to rise. There's a monastery near the river. Old friend of my father's. He'll shelter us. She slipped her arm around him. Together they vanished into the olive groves, the fire painting the sky behind them in red and gold. By dawn, the city was quiet again. They reached the monastery, a place of silence and stone. The old abbot, Father Leon, took one look at Percival's pale face and ushered them inside without a word. As Leon cleaned the wound, Gabriella sat beside the bed, her fingers never leaving his. "You've been running for so long," she murmured. "First from duty, then from me, then from yourself." He smiled faintly, weak but alive. "And every road led back to you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then stop running. Stay." He opened his eyes, voice barely above a whisper. "If you'll have me." "I already do." 3 days later, when the flames were nothing but ash and rumor, a messenger brought news. Countess Fiorenza's estate had fallen, her crimes exposed. The Duke of Hawksmoor was cleared of all accusations. Freedom, hard-won and bittersweet. That evening, Gabriella found him standing by the monastery's cloister, looking out at the horizon. His arm was bound, his posture weary but steady. "They'll expect you to return to London," she said quietly. "Perhaps. But I've lived too long by expectation." He turned to her. "What if we chose differently, this time?" She tilted her head. "Differently? No titles. No courts. No lies." His gaze softened. "Just us. In the open." Gabriella smiled through the sunset light. "Then where will we go?" He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "Wherever you paint light." That night, Florence slept under a pale moon. The monastery bell tolled softly, the sound rolling through the valley like a benediction. Inside the quiet stone room, Gabriella painted by candlelight, his profile bathed in gold, eyes half-lidded, a man reborn through fire. When she set the brush down, he came behind her, wrapping his good arm around her waist. "Does it look like me?" he whispered. She smiled, leaning into him. "No. It looks like the man I prayed you'd become." He kissed her shoulder, breathing her in. "Then let that be who I stay." The wind rustled through the open window, carrying the scent of smoke and jasmine, of endings and beginnings intertwined. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the Arno, gilding the water, and somewhere, far beyond the hills, the bells began to ring again. Not for death. For deliverance. The letter trembled in Gabriella's hands before she even broke the seal. The Duke's crest, wax-red and cold. Delivered at dawn. No messenger in sight. Just the folded weight of fate pressed against her palm. She tore it open, heart hammering. "My dearest Gabriella, by the time this reaches you, I will be gone. Not by will, but by duty. England calls once more, and I cannot refuse. The house of Eldereach stands on the edge of ruin, and my name is the only thread holding it together. I promised you peace, but peace demands war first. Forgive me. I will return when the debts of my fathers are finally paid. Percival." The paper slipped from her fingers. The ink bled with her tears. "Gone. Again. Coward," she whispered into the cold Florentine morning. "You said no more running." But he had run, not from her this time, but into the jaws of his legacy. She pressed her hands to her face, shaking, breath shallow. Around her, the monastery courtyard was bathed in dawn's soft gold, monks chanting their prayers beyond the cloister walls. Her prayers had all run dry. 2 weeks passed with no word. Florence whispered his name like a rumor, England roared it in scandal. Newspapers arrived wrapped in foreign script, the Duke returns to reclaim the estate, Eldereach awaits its master, a union in jeopardy? The Duchess in Italy alone. Each headline a blade. Each night, she painted his face, trying to remember the exact way his eyes softened when he looked at her. The exact warmth of his hand against her cheek. But paint couldn't hold pulse. And memories couldn't hold a man. Until one night, when thunder rolled over the valley, and the monastery gates clanged open. She turned, and froze. He stood there, drenched to the bone, his clothes torn, his arm bandaged. His eyes found hers through the rain, and the world stopped. "Percival." He stumbled forward, barely standing. "They tried to kill me." She ran to him, catching his weight against her shoulder. "My God. They said I betrayed the crown. That my father sold secrets to France." His breath came ragged. "It was a lie, planted by the same men who sent me to marry you, to bind Italy and England in name only." Her hands trembled as she guided him inside, slamming the doors behind them. "You're safe now." He gripped her wrist, eyes fierce despite the blood on his collar. "No, Gabriella. Not yet. They'll come here next. The papers, the crown's envoys, they'll use you to find me. Then we'll run." He almost laughed, bitterly. "To where?" We've already burned every bridge between two nations. Then we build one, she said, her voice breaking but steady. From us. They hid in the monastery's old wine cellar, among barrels of dust and silence. Rain drummed above, relentless. Percival's body burned with fever. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, whispering prayers in Italian. You should have left me, he muttered. I couldn't, she said softly. You're my husband. He turned his head, pain shadowing his features. Am I? Or am I the ghost they made you love, a man built on debts and secrets? Her answer came like a knife's whisper. You are the man I chose, Percival. And I would choose you again, even if the world turned its back. He closed his eyes. It already has. At dawn, soldiers came. Gabriella heard the boots first, the rhythmic march on stone. Then the voice, by order of the crown. Duke Percival of Eldereach is charged with treason against the English monarchy. Surrender him at once. She looked down at him, weak and pale, still asleep on the cot. Her heart broke cleanly in two. She stood, brushed the tears from her cheeks, and walked up the narrow stairs to the chapel. The door burst open, soldiers in red and black, rifles raised. I am Duchess Gabriella of Eldereach, she said clearly, her voice echoing off the marble. My husband is not here. The officer's gaze hardened. We have orders to search the grounds. She stepped closer, lifting her chin. Search, then. But remember, you walk on consecrated ground. He hesitated. If you're lying? I am praying, she interrupted. And if your God still listens, you'd best tread softly. They searched. Every hall, every cell. But not the wine cellar, not beneath the altar where only monks walked. When the soldiers left, the rain began again. Gabriella sank to the floor, her body shaking. Percival emerged, weak but alive, his eyes hollow with guilt. You shouldn't have done that. I would do it again, she said fiercely. Love isn't silence. It's defiance. He fell to his knees before her, gripping her hands. Then I will not run again. Not from them. Not from this. 3 weeks later, a ship left the Italian coast under false names. Aboard it, a man and woman sat together beneath a wool blanket, the sea wind tangling their hair. Where will we go? She asked quietly. Percival smiled faintly. To the only place left unclaimed. Which is? Freedom. She rested her head on his shoulder, eyes closing. And when they find us? He kissed her hair. Then we make them believe we were never real. Months passed. Whispers of the vanished duke spread across Europe, a legend of the noble who fled his crown for love. Some said they drowned. Some said they lived quietly in the south of France. But one summer evening, in a small village near Provence, a painter unveiled her newest work, the velvet box and the key. The painting showed a woman holding an open box, light spilling out in the shape of a heart, and a man's shadow behind her, hand reaching not for gold, but for her. No one knew their names. But in the corners of the gallery, an old man with gray eyes and a woman in a violet shawl stood together, silent, fingers intertwined. When the crowd dispersed, he leaned close to her ear and murmured, "Do you still have it?" She smiled and drew a small, worn velvet box from her bag. Inside, the key, tarnished, but still shining where his hand had once touched it. It was never about the box, she whispered. It was about what it opened. He took the key, pressed it to her palm, and closed her fingers over it. Then keep it. You're the only door that ever mattered. Outside, the evening bells tolled again, soft, distant, endless. And somewhere, across two nations that once tore them apart, their names were forgotten. But their love, whispered through time, painted in silence, endured. The Nightingale newsletter closed that month with a single line printed in gold ink. And so ends the tale of Gabriella of Florence and Percival of Eldereach, a love not written by crowns, but carved by fur. E.